Hi everybody, and welcome back to another video. So I just wrapped up the Game of the Year stream not too many days ago. We are, as of the time of recording this, on December 31st, the end of 2021. So what better thing to do than talk about my top 10 games of the year? I would say that this year, overall, 2021 has been a good year for games. A lot of good to great games, actually, that came out. I don't know that any of them are going to escalate to lifelong favorites or would edge into my top 10 of all time or anything like that, but I literally don't think we can have an entire year go by without good games coming out because there's just so many. So I've whittled my list down to my 10 picks and a few honorable mentions that I'll throw in as we get closer to the top here. But why don't we just go ahead and dig right into it? Oh, also, just so you know, I will be uploading the full deliberations process onto my second channel. It's just my VODs channel for my Twitch streams that I upload some of my full playthroughs to. So if you want to check that out, take a look at the link in the description down there where I will post a link to that channel so you can watch the entire deliberations if you want. Every year we have a tradition of going through the very painstaking process of putting all the games that I played and enjoyed into one big list, whittling it down and organizing it live on stream so you can see the process, you can see the logic, you can see the struggle, you can see the pain, all that stuff. So let's get started with my number 10, and that is a little game called Exo 1. So for anyone who's not played Exo 1 before, it's a game that makes sense when you look at videos, but it's surprisingly hard to describe. You play as this sphere orb, just this kind of alien piece of tech that is essentially using momentum to traverse planets and craters and astral objects, we'll say. And so you build up a lot of speed, think like a Marble Madness or a Monkey Ball maybe, except you're actually controlling the object. You'll launch off of a ramp or a sand dune or whatever it might be, and then you can control the gravity of that object to force yourself back down to the ground very quickly. And if you land that on the other side of a crater, you'll hit it and gain a bunch of speed and build more momentum. And the entire game is just about this sort of flow state, this zen of traveling from area to area, just trying to get places as fast as possible, exploring these unknown locations. Very atmospheric, very much a vibe game. Easy to zone out, good ambient soundtrack. And then layered on top of that is what for me was a surprisingly effective story that's pretty succinct, pretty cohesive, and as long as you are able to think a little bit about it, I think is actually a pretty well-told narrative. So this is on Game Pass. I know a lot of people haven't checked it out. I would definitely recommend that you check out Exo 1. And you'll see me looking over here. I have my list to remind myself of what they are because I'm an imperfect human with a brain that has the memory of a goldfish. My number 9 is a surprise to me. I love Hearthstone, or I should say I used to really love Hearthstone, which is not my number 9 game, but I got really addicted to what is essentially a Hearthstone clone called Shadowverse Champions Battle. This is, for anyone who's not aware of the full history of Shadowverse, Hearthstone became immensely popular. Shadowverse, I believe, spun off, or didn't spin off, but was created sort of as an answer to Hearthstone, but with a bit more of a traditionally anime aesthetic. And then that card game built up enough popularity to get an anime, and then that anime now has a video game adaptation published by Xseed called Champions Battle. So this is the game adaptation of the anime for the card game that is similar to Hearthstone. And really, playing this just brought me back to all my muscle memory playing Hearthstone, everything I loved about that game. There's tons of different cards to find and collect. They're really intelligent in that they roll out essentially new expansions as you progress through the story. And this is an entire single-player campaign, I should be clear. This is nothing like those other card games. This is a traditional RPG setting, very similar to Persona. You're in a school, you're building relationships with different friends. And it's got kind of a tropey story ultimately about saving the Shadowverse Club. But what the real meat and potatoes is, and why I like this game so much, is just how well the game plays and how rich and detailed the actual mechanics of the card game are. So you can spend as much time as you want to building decks, and coming up with different strategies, trying out all these different cards. They do have deck codes to help you make some pre-constructed decks. And then they also have other interesting side things, like they have puzzles that will show you a particular board state, and you need to solve to meet a certain criteria, like defeat all the enemies on this board or kill the enemy in one turn. That makes you really think about exactly how you would use the cards. So really great game, a lot of fun. And if you are into card battling games, or Hearthstone in particular, Magic the Gathering, any of those, give Shadowverse Champions Battle a look. Very underappreciated. Now, 2021 was a surprisingly good year for co-op games. And I think the one that most people are talking about is my number 8, and that is It Takes Two. So for anyone unaware, It Takes Two is a tremendously imaginative platforming game where you play as a couple who is sort of on the rocks. They're going through a rough period in their relationship, and essentially they get Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and are traversing a bunch of environments sort of in and around their house, ultimately trying to work on their relationship and work through their problems. What makes this game so good is the actual platforming mechanics. If this was a single-player game, it would be lauded as one of the most inventive and clever platformers of all time. They're constantly switching up the mechanics. They're constantly doing clever things. And it all just feels really good to control. The story, I think, falls a little bit flat. It doesn't maybe have the greatest messaging in terms of how we should maturely handle relationships and what the end of a relationship really means. But if you sort of wireframe it and just enjoy the mechanics and the gameplay of it, it is phenomenal. And I got to play it with my partner. She and I had a blast playing through it together. It was a real treat, and I would recommend anybody check it out. Number 7 is the other co-op game I was really into this year. So this one is much less popular, but some of you might know it because it's sitting in your PS Plus library. And that's a game called Operation Tango. So when this got added to my PS Plus library, I was immediately excited because it reminds me of another more party-ish game that I really love called Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. But the setup for Operation Tango is one person plays as a hacker and one person plays as a field agent. And it's got a very sort of retro 50s, no one lives forever kind of vibe. And the agent will infiltrate a facility, and the hacker will be taking down computer systems or feeding them information, forging identities, whatever it might be, to help navigate them through. And so the co-op is you and your partner basically relaying information that only one of you has back and forth to each other, giving you just enough to help them just a little bit more, to help you just a little bit more. And they do a lot of very clever, very creative stuff. I can't even begin to imagine how difficult this game was to design to make sure that both of those perspectives are properly spoon feeding information in a way that is helpful. But either way, what really made this game special for me is I was able to play through the entire thing live on the Twitch stream with my good buddy R.E. Lewis 2011, who also just recently dropped his 2021 Game of the Year list that you should very much check out. I'll drop a link to that down in the description below as well, so you can go take a look at that. And spoilers, I believe Operation Tango does make an appearance on that list as well. But he and I had an absolute blast. We were ear to ear the whole time. It was some of the hardest I'd laughed. Just an amazing experience all around. Great game, great co-op, very clever. I would highly recommend that everybody check out Operation Tango. My number 6 is a game that a lot of people probably have very high on their lists, and for good reason. It is Metroid Dread. So I'm actually a pretty big fan of Samus Returns, the 3DS remake of Metroid 2 that Mercury Steam did prior to this. And clearly Nintendo was too, because they said, yeah, go ahead, take a crack at the full thing, and Metroid Dread really does deliver. They ratchet up the difficulty in a way that I think folks that have played all the previous Metroid games can really appreciate. Ekes into a little bit of that, dare I say, Souls territory. Not really, but it does ratchet it up compared to previous games in this series. And on top of that, the exploration, the control, it's all just so good. It feels so good running around. Every motion is fun. Jumping is fun, shooting is fun. It's all just you just can't wait to put your hands in the controller and do it. I like this game so much that I ended up playing through the entire thing in 2 big sittings. One like 12-hour session because I had literally nothing else going on that day, and then I cleaned up the rest the next day, got 100%. It's so good. And hopefully everyone who wants to play this has had an opportunity to. But if not, I think most people will tell you that Metroid Dread is pretty good. The reason it's lower on my list is because it does, I think, have some pacing issues towards the latter half, and sometimes they lock you out of certain areas, so I wasn't able to fully get lost and explore the way I wanted to. But I'd be kidding myself if I didn't admit that I had an absolute blast playing through Metroid Dread. Number 5 is one of my favorite platformers of the year, and that is Psychonauts 2. I was a fan of the original Psychonauts. I wouldn't call myself a super fan by any means, but I was very interested given the long, sort of tumultuous development history that Psychonauts 2 has gone through to see how it turned out, and I was really blown away. I mean, the platforming is spot on, very, very fun, a lot of cool environments to explore, a lot of cool mechanics that they throw in. But what I didn't expect is like the heart that this game has. I mean, I was surprisingly invested in the story and the journey of these individual characters. I found myself really caring about Raz. I think that the performance by the voice actor is incredible. A lot of the supporting cast as well is very well written and very well voiced. All like very human, very relatable. The game tackles some like pretty intimate themes. I think, Psychonauts being a game that you explore people's minds, you can sort of imagine what types of anxieties, fears, concerns you might be helping someone address, and I think that they do it very tastefully and just like unbelievably clever. The fact that this game has 10 art styles essentially blows my mind, and they all look very good. So I would highly recommend you check out Psychonauts 2, although I will say don't play it on an original Xbox One. It does not run great there. I would recommend you check it out on a Series X, or at least a 1X for the best experience. Number 4 is a roguelike that I could not stop thinking about after I put it down, and that is Returnal. So Returnal is the latest game from Housemarque, kind of their biggest and grandest outing to date. And it's just so it's so crisp. Like the fact that they take their sort of traditional bullet hell mechanic and successfully map that into 3D space in a third-person shooter blows my mind. It just works so dang well. I thought the enemy designs were very cool. The boss fights were just like edge of your seat fun. It was just so addicting. Even though by roguelike standards, it has very little in the way of like progression mechanics. You really do lose a lot and start over essentially from scratch. I still, every time I died, I was like, oh, I got to do one more run. I got to do one more run. And I had a really great pacing all the way through. Story is, I don't know that I could fully explain the story to you, but I'll tell you this. It is interesting every time you come across any new bits of lore, any little details, because they do some weird stuff. And yeah, all the different biomes have these great different visual styles. A real good, just like accomplishment when I finished this game. I just felt awesome. So that makes Returnal my number 4. Number 3 is the least indie game that still was an indie game this year, and that is Emberleb's Cana Bridge of Spirits. Oh my god, this game is gorgeous. Oh, it looks so good. You would not believe that this was not a AAA game, just looking at screenshots. Emberleb is primarily these two brothers, and they do have a history of computer, like CGI animation. I think they did some like contract work for Pixar and DreamWorks and things like that. Maybe not exactly those companies, but they are familiar with the process of creating actual animated films. And that really comes through in the character models, the animations, the facial expressions, everything in Cana. And then on top of that, you throw it in this beautiful, lush, like forest world. Add a ton of heart, just a very sweet, very tender game. I love that the story focuses on the people and the place that you're in and not so much on Cana herself. I think that leaves a lot of room for the sequel, but while also like delivering a narrative that is very whole, very cohesive, thematically rich. And then the combat itself was super fun because it turned out to be a lot tougher than I thought it was. Between this and Metroid Dread, it was a year for games being a little harder than you'd expect. But a lot of people liken Cana to a PS2 era platformer or action platformer. And usually people say that in a derogatory way. I'm here to tell you that that's a good thing for me. I love that. So easily a recommendation I could give to anyone. If you have a PS5, check out Cana Bridge of Spirits. My number 2 is a game that I wish more people weren't sleeping on, and that is Fantasian. So Fantasian is a traditional JRPG from Mistwalker, and this is essentially the Final Fantasy that fans of the PS1 Final Fantasies have been asking for but haven't received in a long time. If you miss, Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 9, games in that era, and you want to see what like a modern version of that looks like, check out Fantasian. The first thing you'll notice is its very striking visual style. So it's so faithful to those PS1 RPGs I was mentioning that it actually does use pre-rendered backgrounds. They're not 3D environments. But to bring that kind of into the modern day, how they did it was they created all these beautiful, detailed, rich dioramas. And then they took a bunch of photos of them from a bunch of different directions, and those are the pre-rendered backgrounds that you play on top of. And then you add that to a score done by Nobuo Uematsu, and he absolutely crushes it. He uses a lot of synth and really feels like he's trying to call back to the spirit of those older RPGs while making it a little more like full than those soundtracks maybe were previously, having a little bit more like layers and complexity. And then the combat mechanics themselves are pretty clever. They do some traditional JRPG stuff, very similar to like a Final Fantasy X in terms of how the turn order works and swapping party members in and out during battle. The big hook for Fantasian is the Dimension, which lets you essentially store all of your random encounters in this alternate dimension and then fight all of them all at once. So rather than getting into a bunch of fights over the course of a dungeon, you kind of build them all up and then in one huge fight take down 40 enemies all at once. And there are attacks that are sort of like targeted and aimed, like almost skill shotty type things. There are AoEs. The position on the battlefield of enemies matters, and so the AoEs will hit like clusters of enemies and things like that. It's just so fun. Story is very well done, very charming. The characters are very likable. Just top to bottom, an incredible RPG. The reason more people haven't played this is because it's only on Apple Arcade right now. It's only on mobile. But I'm telling you, when Fantasian comes to Switch or consoles of any kind, this is going to be a game that people won't stop talking about. So I was glad I played it right out the gate. I loved it, and I highly recommend that you check it out as well. Now, before we get to my number 1, I do have to throw out a couple quick honorable mentions. I won't go into as much detail on these, but these are all worth your time. 1, Before Your Eyes, very sweet indie game that uses an actual real-life webcam. It uses your webcam. It eye tracks, and then your blinking is what controls the game. And so every time you blink, the scene changes. And it tells a very, very touching story using that mechanic. I won't spoil anything, but it uses it to great effect. A racing game that I really loved this year, Cruise and Blast. Technically the first home port of its arcade version, which came out a few years ago. But I had just a ton of fun playing Cruise and Blast. Very colorful, full of life, full of imagination. Easy pick up and play racer, so check that one out. Solar Ash, this is the latest game from Heart Machine, who previously did Hyper Light Drifter, and plays very much like The Pathless, or a good mashup to think of it would be like open world gameplay with the momentum controls of like Jet Grind Radio, and occasionally a little bit of the boss fights from Shadow of the Colossus. So if those are interesting to you, or you look it up and you enjoy what the game visually looks like, very striking, check that one out for sure. A great survival horror game that I played this year was Tormented Souls. This is a throwback to Silent Hill and Resident Evil games of yore. So those first 3 Resident Evils, Silent Hill 1, 2, 3, games like that. If you miss those, do yourself a favor and check out Tormented Souls. And finally, The Forgotten City, which is this incredible narrative all about the Golden Rule. So this society that lives by this code of the Golden Rule, where if anybody sins or breaks any of the town's rules, everyone is turned to gold. And it's essentially just you running around talking to people, exploring the themes of that. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend that you do. So that brings us to number 1. And honestly, it was a toss-up for my top 3 this year between Cana, Fantasian, and my actual number 1, which was Chicory. So Chicory is it's hard for me to put into words better than the game could do itself visually, but you play as this very cute little character who is in an entirely black and white world. All the color has been drained from it. And through circumstance, you become the wielder of this magical paintbrush that is the only thing that can restore color to the world. And so you control the character in very much top-down, like 2D Zelda style. But you can also freely control the paintbrush with your cursor or the touchpad if you're playing it on console to color and brush the world's color back. And so it's you exploring this very rich, very detailed world, restoring all the color to it. You get a lot of clever traversal mechanics and abilities and things that creatively use the paint and the color in ways that I wasn't really thinking of. Very well done puzzles, tons of little secrets to find hidden all throughout the world, and a very touching story that covers some themes about being honest with yourself and what your destiny really means, what you can accomplish versus what you expect yourself to accomplish. Very, very well told, and I think well written as well. I wasn't expecting the game to really land with me from that perspective, but I thought it would mostly be a mechanical thing, but it's both. It's really a very rich game. Soundtrack is incredible. I mean, there's not a bad track on it, and it's just super fun to play through. Very good to explore. It doesn't overstay its welcome, but it's also not too short. Really just kind of everything that I'm looking for in a good indie game. So I would highly recommend you check out Chicory, and I would highly recommend you check out any of the games on the top 10. So that will do it for me for this year. Again, this was a very long process put together from a Twitch stream that I will link down below. And as always, I'm just curious to know what everybody else's game of the year was, and I'm excited for 2022 and what it means for games and for the channel. So I really do. I appreciate everyone for watching. I know that it's a long one, and I appreciate you sticking it out. So until my next video, and there will be a next video, until then, take care and enjoy your games. Peace.